You know, most people overlook the quiet signals, the subtle fractures that ripple through a society long before headlines scream crisis. If we're honest with ourselves, it's not always the riots or the scandals that reveal our weakness. It's the way neighbors stop speaking to one another, the way communities shrink into silence, the way trust erodes so slowly you hardly notice until the bedrock of civic life is cracked. We measure a nation not just by its wealth or power, but by the health of the ties that bind its people. And when those ties fray, when inequality and isolation deepen, when the shadow of distrust grows, we face a stark question. Can we recognize the illness before it consumes us and summon the courage to heal it together? History has a way of whispering its lessons if we listen. In the early decades of the 21st century, economic pressures and the widening gap between the haves and have-nots began to reveal themselves not just in statistics, but in lives quietly constricted. People retreated into echo chambers of similarity, seeking comfort in what they already knew, and in doing so, they ceded the space for empathy, for dialogue, for understanding. Communities that once thrived on shared effort and mutual care began to fragment, leaving civic institutions under strain and democratic norms tested. Leaders and citizens alike were confronted with decisions that mattered less for immediate applause and more for the long arc of justice. Would we reach across the divide, or would we turn inward and accept the growing fissures as inevitable? Economic recoveries might lift markets, but without attention to the social fabric, they could leave resentment, disillusionment, and disengagement in their wake. And the stakes are not abstract. Polarization weakens the very foundations of collective problem solving, amplifying crises from climate to inequality, and threatening the cohesion that allows societies to endure. I've seen this up close, both in Chicago neighborhoods and in the Oval Office. When I was organizing in Chicago, I learned that the smallest acts of connection, showing up, listening, helping a neighbor navigate a bureaucratic tangle, could build trust that no policy alone could secure. And later, as president, I watched economic storms and partisan battles test the resilience of our institutions. I saw people retreating into suspicion, believing that what's good for their family must come at the expense of someone else's. And yet I also saw extraordinary courage, teachers, volunteers, community leaders, and ordinary citizens stepping forward to bridge divides, to mentor, to advocate, to insist that we rise or fall as one. It reminded me that leadership is not only about speeches or executive orders, it is about empathy, patience, and the quiet insistence that we do not abandon the bonds that hold us together. There is a humility in that work, a recognition that progress is slow, that setbacks are inevitable, and that change often comes not from grand gestures, but from persistent, steady effort. When we step back and reflect on these patterns, the lesson is profound. A society's health is not measured solely by its output or its wealth, but by the strength of its moral and social fabric. When inequality, dishonesty, or greed are tolerated, when the pursuit of self-interest eclipses the responsibility we owe one another, democracy itself becomes fragile. Yet the human capacity for courage and empathy offers a counterweight, choosing connection over division, dialogue over echo, solidarity over resentment. These are acts of moral leadership that any citizen can exercise. They are the quiet resistances that cumulatively rebuild trust, and in the spaces where division seems inevitable, where cynicism whispers that nothing can be done, the exercise of responsibility, the embrace of collective care, is both radical and restorative. It reminds us that the arc of justice is not self-correcting. It bends only when deliberate hands guide it, when ordinary people insist on fairness, and when leaders act not out of expediency, but out of conscience. So as we consider the quiet signs that a society is unwell, we confront both challenge and opportunity. The work of restoration demands courage, empathy, and patience. It asks that we acknowledge the shadows, those subtle but corrosive forces that erode trust, while committing ourselves to acts, both large and small, that rebuild community. We must ask ourselves, how do we nurture connection when isolation is tempting? How do we hold leaders and neighbors accountable while extending the hand of understanding? And perhaps most urgently, how do we remind ourselves that in division we falter, but in unity we rediscover our strength as one people? The answers are neither simple nor immediate, but they are essential. Because the quiet wounds of a society often cry loudest for our shared healing, and the measure of our character lies in whether we heed them before it is too late.